Welcome to Common Sense Medicine, a podcast where we think about common sense and how we know it's not common in medicine. So today I have the pleasure of having Stuart Blitz on. He has extensive experience operating in the healthcare industry, which is why I wanted to talk to him. He's currently the co-founder and chief operating officer at Hone Health, which is a meds optimization clinic that offers at-home blood tests, telehealth consultations, and medication delivery. Prior to this, Stuart held the position of Chief Business Officer at SeventhSense Bio as well as AgaMatrix. He served as the Executive Director of Business Development and Strategy, as well as the Director of Worldwide Commercial Development. Stuart's experience spans over several years and includes a focus on improving healthcare systems and providing convenient solutions for consumers. So, with that very broad, extensive bio, welcome to the show, Stuart.
Thanks so much for having me, Sri.
So I actually wanted to get started with kind of how I found you, also your background. So you're working at Hone Health right now, but I'd like to back up and see when you started, your inception in the
Sure.
health tech sphere. So I was doing some research and I realized that you started your career at AgaMatrix, which was a diabetes care company, and you marketed the first ever FDA approved device on an iPhone. I think that's pretty historic. So I'd love to learn more about that.
Sure. So started my career, joined two founders that started AgaMatrix in the diabetes space. Um, Joined them, seemed really interesting. I had done, biomedical engineering in college, and so I was, I went to Johns Hopkins, and so I was kind of like the black sheep there because everybody wanted to go to med school or do government research, and so me wanting to go into entrepreneurship and startups was quite bizarre for Johns Hopkins. And so joined them and learned a ton. And I think it was really amazing because I ended up joining founders that were incredible and are incredible. Have gone on to do other really interesting companies. And so it was an amazing experience working with them. We made glucometers, as you mentioned, that, if people remember, even prior days before all these CGMs came on, you kind of prick your finger and put a drop of blood onto a test strip. And so we started, they had we had some technology that would make them more accurate and we could do certain things. And so we launched a medical device company. And so we started selling our products around the world. We ended up getting them into retail pharmacies. What's interesting is even today, shockingly, you can go into a CVS and buy the CVS glucometer. I was in one the other day and it still blows my mind. 15 years later, whatever it's been, 14 years later, and that device that we made is actually still on their shelves. So which is really cool.
Wow.
You can go into Target, Kroger, lots of other brands. And then as you pointed out, this is kind of right when Apple was kind of getting into health tech. And so we started working with them right around when the iPhone came out. And so we made the first ever FDA cleared medical device that I kind of connected to the iPhone. This is, way before, so now it's just more common, but we had to, build a piece of hardware with a 30-pin connector in it, right? Which sounds easy, but think about all the medical device validation you have to go and put that in. And it was really cool. And so that actually helped us get a partnership with Sanofi because they were looking for innovative ways to expand their insulin program. And they liked the offerings that we had. So we did a big partnership with them. And so that was toward the end of my time there. And it was a worldwide partnership. And so they paid us to develop a lot more products. And they distributed our products in probably 20 or 30 countries at that point.
That's awesome and impressive resume for doing your work. I guess over 10 years you've been at this company. I think now in the era of COVID, a lot of early career professionals like myself happen to jump around from company to company. Not so much with doctors because we have a very stable kind of pathway, right? Residency and
Yeah.
fellowship and then attending. But I guess why did you decide to stay at AgaMatrix for so long?
It's
What
it's
really
it's a
drove you
really
to
it's
do
a really good question, right? Because I think you don't see that a lot these days. And when I look back on it, it was a lot of, I would say I was there for about 10 or so years, and it was almost like every 2 to 3 years we did something new. And so it kind of it ended up being that long, but didn't feel that long because, the first couple years it was very classic startup survival mode. It was like, hey, we had originally, this tells you like kind of the startup story. We originally thought, hey, we're going to sell software so that companies that make the glucometers can make them better. And right, that if people don't know the industry,
Yeah.
it's the dumbest thing ever, because you don't make your money in those, right? It's like the
Yeah.
classic printer and printer cartridges, right? It's like you
Yeah.
basically
It's
give
the
away
it's
the
the
printers.
strips. Yeah.
Exactly. And so we're like, well, this is stupid. We should just build a meter and a strip, because you make your money on the strips. And so the first couple of years are very classic, like, hey, let's figure out what you're working on, raise some more money, know where you're going. Then we spent the next couple of years after that saying, great, now we know what we're building. Let's go get our first sales. And so we did some early partnerships. We got signed a deal in Canada, signed a deal in Europe, signed a deal in Mexico, signed a deal in Australia, like just a whole bunch of places that would actually distribute our products, some in the US as well. Actually, a very big one in the US. If people know of a company called Liberty Medical, they were known a number of years ago where Wilford Brimley would do advertisements for them. They were one of these companies that provided medical products to people on Medicare. And so we did a product for them. And so that was really fun and interesting, got products into those hands. And then after that, we said, okay, great. Now we've got an initial base of revenue. We were kind of like getting more closer to sustainability. Great. Now we really got to go fight, a lot of these hard, complex systems in US healthcare and say, hey, how are we going to get our products into all these different pockets? So we hired a sales team, a more seasoned chief commercial officer who kind of knew all these ins and outs. And that was a few years, right? Then we had the opportunity of working with the product connected to an iPhone, and then got the Sanofi deal. And so it was like, oh, wait a second, we're going to keep going with our core business, but wait a second, this, multi-billion-dollar, one of the largest pharma companies in the world wants to use our products. Now we're going to have to support them across the world and build new products for them. And so it was just interesting, because even though it was a long time, every couple of years we kind of had a different focus of sort of the core group of us that were working there.
Yeah, that's very interesting, moving from strategic initiative to strategic initiative. I was actually reading one of your articles about how to be scrappy at a conference for like introducing ideas to
Yeah.
people. And one of the ideas was around like getting a conference badge at any way possible, trying to figure out where the VIP. So I understand where you're coming from, where the scrappy mentality comes from.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, like your switch from that to the next
Yeah.
venture that you were going on. You were entering in a much higher role, and you were kind of working with flagship, which is like a venture backed startup instead of just starting your own. How did that kind of play into your calculus for your next career move?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously had a lot of experience in health tech and saw a lot of interesting things happening in diagnostics. I'd actually met SeventhSense years before I ended up joining them, when they were trying to figure out what their product was. They had an earlier version of the device that they had that didn't know what to do with, but it was almost like, if you think about a more interesting type of Lancet for people with diabetes, that's how I had met them, because one of our medical advisors actually knew them. And it wasn't very interesting for the application, frankly, because if you think about Lancets that used for glucometers, they cost fractions of a penny, right? They're just basically free, right? And so if you had this device that would cost in the orders of dollars or tens of dollars, right, it just never would make any sense. But they kept going, and they kind of realized, like, wait a second, there's this interesting angle of people are now going to do more testing and healthcare at home. If you're going to do blood
Mm-hmm.
tests, right, you have the glucometers and things where you take a very small drop of blood. But other than that, you're just going to a LabCorp request, right, to get a blood draw. And there was nothing in the middle. And so I think they were hitting on that right around the time, for all her faults, like Theranos is making a lot of press around the concept. And, she was never wrong about the idea of, hey, if you could make a product that did this, would be wildly used, wildly valuable. And so the concept of having this device that collects blood was really, really interesting. And so that's kind of why I said, wait a second, there's so much you could do with this. And so
Yeah.
when I met the team, and I said, wait a second, this is really cool. There were some interesting kind of niche applications, but I was like, wait a second, the at-home collection space is kind of like they were craving something like this, because that's a category which is, people have more propensity to pay for a little more money for something, right? They want to have a better experience. They want something that's painless.
Right.
And so that it was an interesting experience, because I really learned so much about the lab market and about how those products work. Now, what was cool was it was kind of right at the time when all the direct to consumer lab companies were forming. So I, met all those companies doing that. It was when Roman and Hims were starting out, and so
Mhm.
saw this interesting direct consumer access angle for, medication, and my learnings kind of taught me to kind of, I'd say one of the key things I learned was the SeventhSense product, and there's other products like it in the space. They're all very interesting, but they all haven't sort of, I would say, hit that plateau yet in terms of, or hit that inflection point yet of getting to really mass adoption. And there's a number of reasons why, right? But it's like there's a cost angle, there's a lab compatibility angle, there's a usability angle.
Yeah.
Because like, if you think about doing a test or doing a blood collection, a LabCorp request, if you're a phlebotomist and let's say you grab a tube or a needle out of your bag, right, and you try drawing blood on somebody and there's something happens, well, you just toss it
Mhm.
away and use another one, right? If you're going to
Right.
send this device to somebody's home, it's got to work reliably 99, very
Yeah.
high percentage of the time. Those devices, it's not there yet, at least from what I've seen. Maybe they're getting over. So I think it's going to get there. But what that experience taught me was I saw all these at-home companies forming. I saw, Roman, I saw Hims, and my thesis was very much, I love that model. I think there's going to be a lot more direct-to-consumer cash pay access companies started, but I think they're going to form around, I would say, very high-need patient populations that aren't getting served
Mhm.
by the current system. I frankly didn't know which patient population to go after. I made some friends doing other types of conditions, and I was thinking, okay,
Right.
well, which condition to go after? As luck would have it, met my co-founder Saad.
Yeah.
He had been an entrepreneur. He had done pharma before. He had been an entrepreneur in the ed tech space, and then he turned 35, and he had at the time doing about it all the
Yeah.
symptoms of low testosterone. Went to his doctor. His doctor said, "This is just old age. That's my diagnosis." He said, "This is crazy." And so he had started to formulate what would now, eventually become Hone himself. And so he actually had approached us at SeventhSense saying, "Hey, I want to use these blood collection devices because they're really cool. They could make our offering better." And I said, "Look,
Right.
I'll send you a bunch of samples, but it's not going to work. And there's a lot of reasons why, given what you're measuring and kind of the thing. But hey, what do you explain your business to me? Because this is something I've been kind of thinking about doing." And it was the missing piece. I hadn't known anything about low testosterone or that patient population. And so we kind of realized we want to work on the same thing. And so that's how we met and came together and said, wait a second, actually, we work, we think we can work really well together. And that's how we met and came together. This is probably 4.5 years ago now.
Yeah, that's an awesome transition and a great story that leads one into the next about how you kind of progress through your own career.
Yeah.
I think that thesis is very interesting, though. The bigger access, greater TAM markets have more penetration, right? When you have a need, right, more people are willing to pay for cash in order to get that direct to consumer
Yeah.
market. With that angle, though, there are a couple of things that I think you need to solve on, right? One, you don't have a doctor telling you have the condition, so you need to know that you have it.
Yep.
You know that you need to treat it, and then also you need to figure out how can I find the right doctor who also knows how to treat this and give them the regimen to treat it.
Yeah.
So being an operations specific person, how do you close these gaps and how do you think about market development for this particular problem?
Yeah. So when we started at that time, we called it something else, and we used the brand name Peak for a while. That was just because we didn't
Yeah.
know, we hadn't really formulated a whole kind of like brand identity yet. Um, we kind of knew the structure of what we needed to build. We knew that we had to do some lab testing. We knew that there had to be physicians that would see our patients, to your point, because they're the ones that have to, you know, just like no different than going into a bricks and mortar clinic, right? And so we said, okay, well, we have to go build our own physician network. That was something I think really core to what we did. A lot of the direct consumer companies, when they started, would use companies like Wheel or SteadyMD. Because we are providing specialty care, we just felt really strongly that we had to go out to, and to your point, to find physicians that just had that specialty. And we had to learn about those types of physicians, right? And so we had to learn, like, hey, um, who are the ones who knows about that patient population? where do they come from, right? People think about, well, the urologists or endocrinologists, and certainly there are some, but what we found is they kind of span across many different disciplines in medicine, many different specialties,
Yeah.
and they come. Everybody comes from a different place. Like somebody, you might find a physician who's a family practice physician that says, I know this population because I just happened to raise my hand when we started having men with low testosterone come in. I didn't know about it. I educated myself. I started treating them. I learned more. And then a couple of years later, great, I'm kind of like the de facto expert in my practice, right? Or some physicians would say, hey, they work in emergency medicine, but they say, hey, I actually had low testosterone as a patient. And so I
Yeah.
knew that. So everybody came at it from a different angle. And so that was a really important, I would say, decision we made early on that I think is still paying dividends today. And we have an amazing group of physicians that sees our patients every single day.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about trying to find an amazing physician,
Yeah.
right? As a physician myself, or as a budding physician myself, I think that I know a little bit about the doctors that are trying to go into telemedicine, right? One thing I found very curious about your search for a physician is one, you have to, if a physician is interested in your clinic within 5 minutes. It could be that they're taking the call from the emergency room,
Probably
or
one,
they're not
probably
shocked.
1 minute or less. Probably 5 is too long. I need one. So
Yeah. And some of the things you cited are very true, right? You got boomer docs who don't know how to use a Hangout, and you need to send them the Hangout, and then there's a problem. What has been the most annoying experiences that you've had to recruit physicians?
So, well, let me actually do this before I get into that. Maybe I'll just quickly give you there's a 1 minute just on like explaining what hone is and kind of how we get to
Yeah,
that point.
of course.
So,
Yeah,
so
thanks.
when we wanted to provide this service, we realized, hey, let's provide care for men with low testosterone. So basically, patients come in, they'll do a blood test, they'll get about 7 or 8 biomarkers done at a lab. They'll then come meet with one of our physicians, which I'll get into in a second. So they'll have a very full 30-minute audiovisual consult, just like this, right? And they'll go into a very deep intake. They'll do a telemedicine physical, and they'll really go into kind of the symptoms and what their what they think their diagnosis is. If the physician finds that medication is appropriate for the patient, then they would prescribe medication. Then patients can sign up for a monthly membership plan. And so they, provide, as I say, a similar membership to maybe other companies that are out there, and their medications get shipped to their house, every month. Our service is also very different. Our physicians follow guidelines pretty closely in terms of what the accepted protocols are for treating low testosterone. And so our patients
Right.
have to complete another lab, another consult every 90 days for the first year. After that, it's every
Got
six
it.
months, and it kind of is you're more stable. But it's a pretty rigorous program. And so to answer your question, right? So what have we found when we hiring physicians? Well, I can tell you that when we first started interviewing physicians, and our chief medical officer and our medical folks, some of the operations people, we had no clue what what makes somebody a really great fit, what makes somebody not a great fit, and we had to really learn this, right? And I think
Yeah.
to your question, I think some of the key things that what I've found, and I can probably tell within less than a minute, generally speaking, right? Because there's a couple of things. One, do they understand this patient population, right? And so you really quickly, when we put together a list of questions for them, like detailed questions that are like very
Yeah.
easy about protocols around treatment of low testosterone. It's like, if you don't
You know
know,
the dose like that.
yeah, like what type? Like I'll tell you a perfect story. I remember somebody told us, yeah, they're like, I know this, I do this all the time, and we asked them like, what kind of dose would you give a patient, right? They couldn't even tell me,
Yeah.
right? I'm not a doctor, and like
Yeah.
I know this patient population, and it's like if that's kind of worrying, right? If you can't tell me like, hey, what's
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
most common dose you would give somebody of a certain medication?
Yeah.
I'm going to guess you don't really have as much experience with that patient population that you said, right? So that's the first thing. But put that aside. Let's assume they know that. Are you a good communicator, right? Can you, respond, to emails with a good cadence? Are you really interested, right? Or are you just shopping around because you're kind of a mercenary, right? And you're just like, hey, I want to
Yeah.
fill my time, right? Or you brought up the point, am I taking the call from the ER? I've had that a lot of times actually, where a physician would take a call from the OR, right? Or from
Right.
the admin area. And it's like, I get it, but I'm like, well, I want to make sure you understand, like when you're going to see our patients, you're doing this, it's like a 30-minute consult. It's not like it's not asynchronous. It's
Yeah,
not something
yeah.
asynchronous where you can just be on your phone looking at stuff and say, great, I'm going to prescribe birth control or ED meds or whatever. And then
Hmm.
you saw, I think I said that, can you use technology, right? Like we've developed a lot of technology tools for physicians to use in the care of our patients. Can you do that, right? It sounds crazy. I've had a lot of doctors that they're like, "Hey, where's the link you sent?" I'm like, "I sent you a calendar invite," right? Like, and it's not. It sounds kind of silly, but it's like I guarantee you, if that physician can't do that on their own, has enough technical know-how to do that, they're not going to be successful, right? And so like we're going to get frustrated with them, they're going to get frustrated with us. It's just nobody's going to be set up for success. So that was a lesson that we learned pretty early on. And I think the last one, which is kind of intangible, it's kind of just trust your gut. I talked to my one of
Yeah.
one of my colleagues, our VP of Ops, all the time, and like we kind of look at each other sometimes. We're like, hey, if everybody's checked all the other boxes, but we're like, there's something bizarre. They've kind of gone away, or like they didn't get back to us for several days or for a week, and like you can kind of explain it once, but it happens again. You just kind of trust your gut, and you're like, there's probably other stuff going on. They've got life going on. They've got their current, their job going on. They're just not going to be a great fit for this, and so that's served us really
Yeah.
well. We have a really, really, really great group of physicians right now.
Gotcha. So does that mean you have mostly contract positions, or is this full-time
Good
workers?
question. So we have a mix across our range. We have some
Yeah.
physicians that are seeing patients, nearly full time, right? I would say,
Yeah.
30, 40 hours a week, and some that do it, half day a week, something like that. It really goes across the range.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Thanks for giving me that intro into the home
Mm-hmm.
health and what you do, because I think it'll make my next question pretty easy to kind of understand. I think you mentioned that they have two consults and you follow guidelines pretty
Mm-hmm.
strictly. One of the panels that you were on, it was about prescribing controlled
Yeah.
medications, right? Testosterone is a controlled medication,
Yep.
and because of the rules around the Ryan Height law, they can't prescribe it with telemedicine. I think the extension's up till 2024 now. Who knows when they'll
Mm-hmm.
extend it to? But if that if that rule reverses, then home health is going to be in kind of a reckoning period, right?
So no, and I kind of explain that. So there's been a lot of efforts around trying to formally change those rules for 15 years at this point, right? Because the intention of the rules was really around people trying just Googling Vicodin and being able to buy it from
Yeah.
illegal pharmacy, right? That was the intention.
Right.
When the Run Hate Act came out, this was like iPhone had just come out, right? This is like
Yeah.
in the early days of even thinking about doing telemedicine consults like this. And so as technology grew, as telemedicine grew, it kind of became evident like, well, we should trust physicians and practitioners, right? To if they are given the ability to prescribe medication, it's really up to them, right? They should do what's clinically appropriate. So now to your point, COVID hit, and so that was it kind of gave everybody a test run, saying, all right, well let's see what happens here. And I think what we have seen over the last year, when the public health emergency ended back in the spring, the DEA made an initial proposal that they said, look, we want to continue access kind of as patients have been getting it. Their initial proposal, which has since changed, is that we
Hmm.
would want a patient to, once they're on medication, see a practitioner in person one time. That was their proposal. I'm paraphrasing, but that was kind of like the proposal. And there's a couple of details. Um, and frankly, for our patient population, it'd be fine. Like our patients that are on testosterone, they're going to lab court every 90 days, right? Or going to a lab every 90 days. And so getting them to go see a practitioner one time to kind of complete that visit, I think would have been okay. Since then, and since you brought it up, right? Recently they extended it to the end of next year. What's happening now is the DEA actually held 2 days worth of sessions in September, really listening
Gotcha.
to all these constituents in the healthcare system, physicians to startups to pharmacists to state medical board, just across the range. And they're doing that because what they're proposing to do is basically put in a process called a special registration process, which would just allow physicians to have a license
Gotcha.
or registration to do it. So, and I actually think that the DEA truly wants to enable access. I think they're
Yeah.
demonstrating that, and so I think candidly, I think it will take them till the end of next year to do it, right? So I think having them extend it just only makes practical sense because it will take them time to put together a framework, get feedback
Yeah.
on it, put it out into the public domain, get more feedback on it, publish it again, and give people enough time to put it into place. So
Yeah.
it's just,
That's the final
and
rule.
then there's the final rule. And then if they're going to get physicians
Yeah.
have to register, then they have to give physicians time to submit stuff to them to register. And then they have to approve it. And, so it's just going to take time. So, but I'm encouraged because I think the DEA is doing a really great job of kind of saying, hey, like we hear you. We
Yeah.
want to make sure we're doing this appropriately. And I think they're doing a great job doing that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, to your point, I think that telemedicine only increases access. And if patients are going to get it, they're going to find ways to get that direct to consumer access, as seen by Romans and hymns. So I think that what you're doing is great. It's just there are surprising things that come out, both from a regulation standpoint and from a business operations standpoint that you don't know about, that'll kind of change your strategic
Yeah,
priorities.
of course. And we work, I mean, we follow that really closely. We work with Foley and Lardner, which is our telemedicine council. Like
Yeah,
they're sort of one of the top, telemedicine councils in the country. And so we stay really close to a lot of the laws that are kind of changing because it is
yeah,
a very new, innovative area, right? Like the fact that
yeah,
you can do telemedicine. I mean, look at all the substance abuse companies, and I mean,
yeah,
the fact that a lot of these amazing care platforms have launched in the last few years, you know,
yeah.
is kind of incredible, right? Like the fact that these populations had never been able to get such great access to care before is actually, I mean, it's a wonderful thing that's come out of the pandemic. Obviously, the pandemic was terrible, but it's at least something positive that can come out of it afterwards.
Yeah, and I think one surprising thing that I heard you talk about was um, most people on the home health protocol actually use injections, and they also go to LabCorp. Which, to your point about people taking stuff at home, like it's surprising that it's kind of switched the other way, where they're going in for blood draws and also like they're taking injection, which is more painful
Yeah,
objectively, as opposed to like creams and stuff like that for testosterone.
it's true, and that's why it's funny because I had spent time in the at-home collection space when I was, learning about it, and maybe you're a bit naive. You think, oh, well, who wouldn't want to do this at home, right? But then you realize it's actually not about either or. It's not mutually exclusive. It's about you want to have multiple options, right? Like you want to have
Right,
because
right.
patients have all sorts of needs, right? You could have a patient that lives, in a city and there's 3 labs like within 2 minutes of them, right? Well, great. They'd
Yeah,
rather just pop in 10, 30 seconds getting their blood drawn and be done, right? Or you could have somebody that lives 150 miles from the nearest hospital lab, and so they want to do it at home, right?
that's
Or
true.
you've probably seen there's companies out there that are having they send phlebotomists to your home, right? And so it's like we want to, and but if you're a patient, you would say, hey, you know what? I'll spend $50 and do
Yeah,
that, or whatever it costs. And so there's things like
yeah.
that. We want to provide as much access for our patients as possible because everybody has different needs, and so we want to provide as much ability to meet those needs as we can.
Yeah, I think it's an innovative practice model. These care delivery companies always, or at least tech-enabled services, is all about the services. Like it's tech-enabled, but at the end of the day, the service has to be convenient, it has to be fast, it has to be kind of providing the value that the patient wants
Yeah.
in order to kind of succeed. And in that vein, I think one question that I was trying to formulate around is like, how do you think about the unit economics of the business, right? The adding your care providers to make more access is great, but when the care providers cost a lot of money and onboarding an additional clinician is a lot of money, how do you reconcile the unit economics, and how are you planning on like growing that in a sustainable way rather than venture backed, we're going to start in all 50 states company?
Yeah. So a couple of things. Well, I think the unit economics have to roughly work from day one. I say roughly work, right? As you get bigger, you have more economics of scale. You'll be able to some lab pricing will get decreased, and so you'll have be able to physicians will be able to say, oh, I can do more consults, and so like you have some things changing as you grow, but the core economics have to work, right? If you if you develop this model and they're kind of upside down, and you see this, to your point, a lot of direct consumer companies, they're they were taking VC dollars in, throwing it at marketing, growing the top line, revenue and patients, but losing money every single
Yeah,
patient
they're
they got,
optimum.
right? And so I think we've been, much more disciplined in terms of, hey, we're going to grow more slowly, but we're going to really focus on that. And I think that's really, really important. And it works for our model. And also that's just kind of how we built the business. To answer your second question, where we're going, right? We're in low testosterone care right now, which is great, and we only serve men right now. We want to expand, weight loss and thyroid and women's care. There's so many other
Right.
areas we can leverage our technology to expand into that only serves to help the unit economics. Because we have patients that come to us today that they'll do a blood test, and they'll see a physician, and the physician might say, "Hey, you have some of these symptoms. It's not low testosterone. Like, I actually don't think that's your diagnosis." Wonderful, right? They're gonna
Right.
they're gonna Here they're gonna say, "Hey, you might try X or Y. We're not providing that care today, but hey, go somewhere else." We want to be able to say, okay, well, maybe the physician was saying, "Well, listen, I think the first thing I would do would be lose some weight." We don't be able to help with that, right? And so today,
Yeah.
the irony is that today these patients haven't had access to any care, or finding it difficult to find us, but our care they're providing is just, only so wide. And so we say, great, go find care locally, but that's kind of what they didn't have in the
Yeah.
first place. So as we expand a bit more broadly, I think that will help.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I saw on your Twitter, I know you're known for your hot takes on Twitter. It was just wondering, for one of the tweets that you had was around this idea that insurance is only should be there for
Yeah.
catastrophic insurance and then cash pay for everything else. I'm wondering how that looks like. Is that like an end state for home health, looking at metabolic health? This is like we're going to cover everything that you need on a clinic basis, but if there's like something, I don't know, like a pheochromocytoma, crazy tumor, endocrine tumor, that's to the
Yeah, it's a
hospital.
good
You go,
question. I'll
you
be
know?
honest with you. I was sitting in very, very bumper to bumper traffic when I tweeted that, because I was just like, I'm just curious. I'm just going to put something provocative out there and see what people say. I
Yeah,
it's funny. I don't know if that happens in 20 or 30 years. Maybe it's longer. Maybe it's never. Because
yeah,
there was a couple people responded, and they were kind of like, a lot of people said, "Hey, I agree. That's where we're going to get to." A bunch of other people said, "Hey, I don't think so, and here's why." I think I think it could take longer, if ever. And the reason is just in general, right? There's so many players that like have different interests in healthcare, that the moment you think like, hey,
mhm,
we should do X, like why wouldn't that be good for patients, everything? I guarantee you there's always an other side of that. People are making money off of that. And so they're always going to then push against that happening, right? And so that's kind of why, like, even though there are things I think in healthcare, and that's one of them, where it's like, well, look, why don't you pay, cash pay for a lot more things, that just more competition, better for
right, right,
patients, all this stuff? Because there's people making money on selling that to insurance companies, instead of for $100 for $1,000, whatever the
yeah,
product or service is. And their interests are going to be not aligned to making that actually happen. And so
right,
and I think somebody responded, I think it was Chris, responded and said, well, yeah, but look at like high deductible health plans today. Like, they haven't been that successful. And it's kind of like a,
yeah,
a segue into that. And it's a really good point, because I there's just so many issues that bubble up on a longer term lens, and so many different stakeholders that have different interests, that I don't I kind of just threw that out there as like
yeah.
a long, but it actually could be 50 years, 100 years, or never. I actually would probably bet the over on that it would take a longer time.
Yeah. I mean, to your point about being a different market, right? There's payers that they need to sell to in order to make more money. Maybe that's why they're defending it. I would say even the fact that consumers, if patients are the consumers rather than being payers the consumers, they're more price discerning, right? You notice that $30 or
Mm-hmm.
$150, how much ever the monthly subscription is coming out of your paycheck. Whereas if you're
Yeah,
going to a doctor, there's moral hazard, right? You're
I
just
don't
like,
care. I'm
well,
not.
it's
I'm
not
not paying
happening to
for it.
me,
Yeah,
so
I'm
I
not
don't
paying
care.
for it. So
Exactly.
whether this doctor over here charged, $250 for my visit, and this other here charged $150, I don't know. I don't care. and so my insurance pays
Yeah,
for it.
exactly. So in that vein, in consumer health tech, is it just a race to the bottom because people see the price tag and they're like, yeah, I can get testosterone from $30 from ABC clinic instead of home. Like, let me go there because they're more price discerning.
Yeah, I mean, I think as some of these D2C markets become more competitive and more services go in, I certainly think you're going to see some competition and some, you know, you're not going to have as much ability to set prices, and people will look around and say, hey, but I also think kind of like any market, right? There are plenty of places today where you can get care for testosterone that are half the price, right, of what we provide.
Yeah,
But a lot of those patients come to us and they say, hey, I really feel like I want to have, just medical care. I feel, I feel better about. And
yeah.
there's plenty of places that are a lot more expensive than us, but they're
Mhm.
doing a lot broader set of panels. There maybe some of them are in person, more concierge medicine, where it's like, hey, I'm going to see you for 2 hours every 3 months. It's just different. They're just like any consumer offering, you have offerings that are across the spectrum of what you're paying for, and how comprehensive it is.
No, for sure. And I think that this idea around value stems from the fact that one, you can have the key offerings that you've carved a niche out, but also you have the ability to grow and expand. And Hone Health has a lot of that because, to your point about keeping operating margins small, you've been able to do that and then build up the cash that you can then invest in the growth into longevity drugs, growth
Yeah.
into endocrine metabolism drugs, et cetera, right? So I guess my next question is around that idea of operating. As the
Hmm.
COO, you're in charge of all operations, right? That is a new role for you after
Hmm.
being business development. How do you think about operating a company like that and keeping OpEx low in order to grow that net margin?
So I think one of the key learnings we've had is really truly understand what you're building and what patients you're serving. And I know, like, it kind of seems, a lot of people say this, but it's true. Honestly, start using Google Sheets before you do anything else, right? You can do a lot with Google Sheets.
Okay.
And so, but if you use Google Sheets and you sort of start with your first patient, your first 10 patients, your first 20 patients, you really begin to understand, hey, what are the technology I should go build, and what do I have to build to now serve 1,000 patients or 10,000 patients, right? And I think just keeping that in mind, because I do think I see a lot of times you'll see companies that jump into just building right away, right? They'll say, hey, I know
Yeah.
what I want to go build. And I would argue until you serve, 1,000 patients, like, you probably don't know what you need to build.
Yeah.
And so I think that those learnings are really critical. And then figuring out, okay, well, how I feel more confident what I'm going to build, and that can help make operations more efficient. And to your point about operating efficiently,
Yeah.
when we built our own EMR, we built all this whole really sophisticated infrastructure to help operate the business. And I remember when we started bringing on some folks to help us run that program, they were looking at it and saying, like, hey, I'm gonna have to hire 3 times the team as we grow, right, in 2 years. But if we build all this technology, maybe I won't. And it's actually kind of cool because we built all this technology. It took a little longer than we thought. And we've, probably only had to increase headcount by 30% or something like that, right? And so,
Well,
and it's proven that, hey, if you build a bunch of technology, because you know how the business works, you know how to serve patients, how to provide tools for your clinicians, you can operate it really
yeah.
efficiently.
That's really interesting. I did want to talk about the
Hmm.
EMR things. In the interest of time, just wanted to get a quick overview of how that process went and what roadblocks you could talk about building a compliant EMR, because I know that CMS has a bunch of guidelines, so does
Yeah.
HHS, like to like make sure that meaningful use is like, is carried out the way they
Well,
want to.
so I would first of all say that, and this is, I have debates with other founders all the time about this. We're not serving that population right now, so we kind
Right.
of didn't take that as a constraint for us, because we said, all right, well, listen,
Gotcha.
we're not going to go into that population right now, or that get billing Medicare, so that's not a constraint for us. But you're completely right that, like, if you're going to go into that population, then you got to think about differently from day one. So we didn't have that constraint. Um,
Gotcha.
but we
That's
Oh,
surprising.
go ahead. I'm
Sorry.
sorry.
No, I just would that's surprising because is it only cash pay? You're not contracting with any payers yet, so
Right
it doesn't
now, it's all
matter.
cash pay. Yep, all cash pay.
Okay,
And I could talk more
gotcha.
about, we're definitely planning on going into
Yeah,
commercial payers and going down that path, but it's all cash pay right now. So we didn't really start with that as a constraint. Um, we did use a third party to start with, right? So kind of like everybody else, we said, hey, let's grab something off the shelf. It's kind of the best of what's out there. There's been a lot of other interesting ones that come out since then. So like, had we launched a year after we did or 2 years after we did, we probably would have used something else to start with. But we used an off-the-shelf platform, and it was, kind of bad, right? I mean, it was fine, and it kind of helped us limp along, but it helped us learn. It helped us know what we wanted to build,
yeah,
and that's what we did. And so, and the I would say the more valuable and interesting part of what we built is less per se the EMR, because the EMR is like, hey, I'm doing notes and
yeah,
I'm providing tools to physician. That's fairly straightforward, but it's more of a sophisticated patient, journey automation, I would say, because think about it, there's so many
gotcha.
different areas where you might need to do different things for patients. If you're managing a lot of patients, you want to make sure that, hey, a physician
Yeah,
might say, hey, Sri, actually, you need to get this additional lab I want to see, because hey, I noticed your labs look good, but there's something here I
gotcha,
wanted to check your liver enzymes again. Great, I got to make sure you do that, right? How do we know that
gotcha.
you're going to do that versus somebody else? And so we wanted to build the right
Right.
tools, that way then you as a physician be able to have that, be able to manage the patient.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think we don't think about operations in such a I mean, it's a lot of ad hoc things that are kind of built on, right? And to your point about getting one person or a free tool to kind of do it first, and then when it's reached its absolute maximum capacity, then move on to something and build it up that way. I think one of the quotes that you had said on a different podcast was like, yeah, it was 80% there, but you're always going to be wanting that 20% that isn't there. So I think that brings me to my next question, which is around the interactions with people as you're kind of growing this org, right? Each marginal new hire from a 10-person company to an 11-person company, that's like 10%
Yep.
or a little less than 10% of the company that you're adding.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very significant decision. For starting off with five co-founders, how did you get along? Or I guess because you were all veterans of the space, you had started companies before, you kind of knew the ropes, or how did it
Yeah,
work
I mean,
out?
and we all had our area of expertise. Saad and I have a really good complementary skill set in terms of things, because it's, we're both, he's really great at sort of marketing and brand and sort of like the user journey, and because he came at it from a patient point of view, right? And I'm finance and ops and sort of like, work with a lot with our telemedicine lawyers, and so we have a pretty complementary skill set. And then we have others, right? Alba had done marketing for Keeps, right? So it was like Roman Hims and Keeps is the third biggest company. So from a direct to consumer, um, you know, uh, men's health, even specifically marketing, right? That was her domain expertise, right? I'm not a paid social acquisition expert. That's not my. I mean, I understand.
Right.
I know how it works, but
Yeah.
I'm not. I know that's not my background. And then, we
Right.
had Matt, who had worked with Saad previously, as our CTO. He had built these very complex systems in ed tech before, and so building them for health tech kind of made
Gotcha.
sense. So we all kind of had our areas, and we really started expanding the team only once it was clear, like, hey, actually, yeah, there is a big patient, their need for this. Oh, we're starting to see a lot more patients. Well, we now have to go, expand the team. And so we did that intentionally. I'm a big believer that kind of like you need to grow your team, almost too late, I guess, to some extent, because I think I often see companies
Yeah.
that grow and get bloated too early. And then if you have too many people there, well, it's always, you're always going to be busy and have stuff to do, but it's kind of like, but if you get too bloated to begin with, probably didn't need to be. And then it just, it kind of doesn't set yourself for the
Right.
future.
No, for sure. I think that looking to the future is a very good thing when you're thinking about, okay, I want to do this sustainably. At 10 years, I want to also be at
Mm-hmm.
Home Health, not at a different company after it went
Mm-hmm.
down. You know what I mean? So I think that it's a good mentality to have. I think just like looking at your arc of your career as a long trajectory, I think the business cycle is also similar when you're aligned with the vision, you know. I think one question that I also had was around that future of home health that you had kind of
Mm-hmm.
laid out, where it's like we're looking to partner with commercial payers. We already have a partner pharmacy, we're cash pay. what does that look like? Does it look like you submitting claims like to an actual payer for home health
Yep.
services, contracting with them for value-based care? Like, what does that look
Yeah,
like?
it's a good question. I think at a minimum, we want to be able to be at a place where we get in network with payers so we can reduce the out-of-pocket costs every month, right? Because our patients, like they're paying cash out of pocket. So if you can massively reduce that for patients, they're going to pay some amount of money every month. But if you can then submit claims to insurance for the consultations or whatever you can submit claims for, that will help. And so now patients can leverage their insurance. So that's a project that we're going down to try to do that, because I think that will help with our current patients and new patients. And then, as I mentioned before, we want to expand the areas that we're, the therapeutic categories that we serve. There's so many others that our patients and our physicians are asking about. So it's kind of a natural, like,
Mhm.
hey, if we could arm physicians and patients with these tools and medications, and the sort of systems in order to do that, that's something that our physicians feel strongly could help our patients. So that's great. That's what we want to do.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to kind of conclude the podcast where it's like, yes, this is the vision of home health. We want to expand into kind of being the telemedicine of, well, first men's health, and then obviously you have grander visions of moving to just a whole person health. So thank you for coming on. I really
Mm-hmm.
appreciate it. Tell the users or listeners where they can find you after this, and where they can find home health if they're looking for a testosterone prescription or even more.
Right. So
Yeah.
if everyone, if you want to get your blood tested or you want to, try our service, it's honehealth.com. Find me very easily. Probably spending too much time on Twitter or X. That's the easiest place, at Stuart Blitz, LinkedIn or whatever. But, probably spend more of a time on Twitter, but pretty easy to find.
Sounds good. And I think I'd like to conclude finally the podcast with me being in the hot seat. I've questioned you enough. It's kind of like an interrogation, but happy to have you ask me a few questions so that we can round out the
Well,
interview.
I guess I'll ask you, of all the entrepreneurs that you've spoken to, has there been one common theme that you've seen, sort of like in companies that have been more successful or growing? Have there been one theme of the founders or the operators that you talk to that you kind of say, hey, everybody kind of feels like this or does this?
I think for me, the ones that I found most compelling are the ones who have one, a clear vision of how they are going to get to their goal, or at least like have an idea of this is my priorities for the next 3 months, 6 months. And it's just that next step mentality and never kind of staying stagnant and paralyzing about their decision. That's the ones that I've seen, or those are the ones that I've seen kind of go
Mm-hmm.
furthest. If you're asking me like just like successful, I think it's too soon to tell. A lot of the companies that I do are early stage startups. They're either venture backed. So I haven't gotten the chance to interview someone who's just about to take their company public, right? So I guess success is a spectrum on that end. But I've seen the ones that have gone the farthest have the vision that like they know what the next steps are in order to get to their clear goal.